Welcome back to Consider It Life. Today I'm doing something of a video love letter to Eric Weinstein. Now, what I want to do today is do basically a series of reaction videos, show you why I love this guy. Now, let me be clear. I did a video a while back called An Evangelical Explains Why I Like Donald Trump. And the contrast between like and love is appropriate there because I like Donald Trump. I think he'll be a good transitional leader as we go from the crazy woke politics to something that is normal and sustainable, right? But when it comes to Eric Weinstein, I love this guy. I saw him on Joe Rogan a few years ago, and I was interested. And the more I've watched this guy, I just love this guy. And what I mean is, like when you see a mother who just is squealing over a new, I just love this guy. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to show you several places where Eric Weinstein shows himself to be an absolutely exceptional person. And we're going to do that through these several clips, and I'm going to be reacting to them along the way just so I don't get flagged for copyright. And then we'll tie everything up with a bow. Now, the last clip is going to be from Eric Weinstein, The Portal, and his conversation with Rabbi Wolpe. And at the very end of that conversation, they get into a discussion about faith versus Eric's particular brand of scientific atheism. So that's where I'm going to depart from Eric and disagree with him for some specific reasons. This first clip is Eric talking to Terrence Howard about his idiosyncratic views on physics.
And I reached out and I said to him, look, dude, you're talking about these 16 fields. I said, I have the models for your 16 fields, which was in
teaching. If you want to say, I don't understand this, you get a positive reaction from us. If you say, I have something and I'm not quite sure what it is, can I get an evaluation because I think I might have something? You should be able to get something from a guy like me.
Okay.
Then you do this other thing, which is you teach, and your teaching is not good. You tell us stuff that's not true, that we can tell is not true, and then we say, okay, I can throw out the entirety of what he's saying. One times one is not equal to two. Let's start there.
Okay, this is just a good stopping place. Keep in mind, we're 2 hours and 20 minutes into this podcast. And I did a video on Terrence Howard and why Terrence Howard was wrong, and I looked at just the fundamental methodologies that Terrence Howard was working with, and I said these are mistaken, and this is why there's a mistake. Eric does something more abstract. He goes to not just the method of the argument, but sort of the overarching sociology of what's going on, and he explains to Terrence, you're teaching. There are things that basically, he's talking about the way Terrence is trying to interact with the community of mathematical physicists. And he says, don't do that. Don't try and teach us our own field, because when you do that, it pisses us off. I just want to note this here. One of the things that is incredibly endearing to me about Eric's patience with Terrence Howard is that Eric's an incredibly intelligent person, trained at Harvard in mathematical physics. The people that he jousts with intellectually are the top physicists in the world, right? These are his colleagues. And for him to condescend, literally to condescend, to come down to Terrence Howard's level and explain to him that he's wrong, but if you watch the podcast, to affirm him in the different ways that his model could be effective for modifications in engineering or something like that, I think displays a high level of character, patience, a graciousness that is unusual. It's uncommon at that level of, because normally what you get from that level of academia is elitism. It's very easy for those people to act elitist, and Eric avoids that, and it's something that's incredibly, I think, valuable. So that's one of the reasons that I love Eric. In this next clip, we'll see him remarking on the difference between good science and great science. And for a scientist like Eric to have the wherewithal to speak on the nature of science, which is actually a philosophy question, is pretty incredible.
So I'm just thinking about what are the characteristics of the people who have been great scientists or have done great science. So things like creativity, I imagine, bravery as well, self-confidence. So these are because they have to say and do things.
Well, with Gregor Mendel, for example, we think he fudged his Peapod data to be artificially perfect. So, in fact, skullduggery, deception, all sorts of very strange characteristics have crept into good science. Drug use, in the case of Kary Mullis, believing in dreams in the case of Kekuli and benzene. Great science is an entirely different kettle of fish. We're very uncomfortable with it because how do you teach people? It's like Werner Herzog, the great film director, made a point of saying you have to lie, beg, borrow, and steal to make great art. This is really unexplored because we're uncomfortable transmitting the rules for great science, and we've fallen into stagnation because of it.
For those of you who don't have a background in the philosophy of science, this really does echo some themes in Thomas Kuhn's work, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. The difference between what Kuhn calls normal science, what's being called good science here, and revolutionary science. Revolutionary science is great science, but it's disruptive. And Eric is mindful enough of the difference between good science, where the practices are pretty much routine. They're transmittable to a next generation of scientists, in ways that great science is not. Great science comes with these flashes of insight, sometimes with, he says, Kekuli and benzene, these mystical experiences, these really weird epochs in the history of science where revolutions happen.
And so we're chasing people with true imagination out of the sciences because what we're saying is that that's not good science. And by the way, then it's not incorrect. It's often not good science.
Right.
And it's very important not to fetishize good science because that's humanity's death knell.
Okay, so that's the last part of Weinstein's commentary on the difference between good science and great science. Just the fact that somebody who has a science background is so mindful of these elements of the history of science and the philosophy of science is actually uncommon. Very well-known scientists like Lawrence Krauss, Neil deGrasse Tyson, the late Stephen Hawking, who will ignore and denigrate philosophy, the philosophy of science, as something that's irrelevant or useless. But here you have Eric dealing with those other disciplines that impinge on the sciences, history and philosophy of science, and he does it with a certain amount of knowledge and grace. Okay, this next clip is Eric talking about the role of faith in the natural sciences. And again, I want you to notice how uncommon it is for someone to be able to adopt the perspective of the other, someone with whom he doesn't agree. So Eric is a very transparent atheist. He's transparent about his atheism, even though he is a sort of a non-practicing Jew, or kind of a semi-practicing Jew and an atheist simultaneously. So in one interview, Eric talks about himself as an atheist who prays. So he's not a militant atheist. And I think he thinks there's something wrong with militant atheism that has no regard for religion. But he goes a little bit further than that, talking about the role that faith can play in the natural sciences.
Should religious scientists live under a cloud of suspicion? And if their religion informs their science, what are we to make of that? Is it contaminated? And I think it's very important to recognize that there are multiple ways of being a scientist who happens to be religious. And I've learned this over time. So I've been wrong on this topic, and in coming into contact with higher quality scientists motivated by religion, I've come to understand that there's a subpopulation that is very special and interesting. And it's effectively a population of people who agree to the rules of science. They're not going to cheat on the rules of science because Jesus.
Okay, that's an important point to make. I've taught philosophy of science in a conservative seminary context for 15 years now. And one of the things that I try and disabuse my students of is this blanching at methodological naturalism. Methodological naturalism is the method of the natural science. There's nothing wrong with methodological naturalism as a method for the natural sciences. We're not going to smuggle God into the science lab in order to give scientific explanations of natural phenomena.
But they are going to use the idea of purpose and a personal relationship with God to give them courage to question things that are essentially unquestionable within the union of scientists, that will get you thrown out of the union of scientists very quickly, as to your point.
Understanding that science is a very human undertaking, right? So there's an aspect of the sociology of science, and Eric, whether or not he is aware of this, he's touching on religion as it affects the sociology of science.
So what we're talking about is relatively self-destructive scientists focused on science who get their courage from religion and some of their bearings and their focus. So for example, many of these people do not believe that there's a persuasive case for random mutation as being the major engine of selection. They believe that it is simply improbable, and they point to very often the Wistar conference held at the University of Pennsylvania, at the Wistar Institute, and they try to say this is a live issue where the books got closed prematurely.
Absolutely. He is absolutely right. People like Stephen Meyer will point back to the Wistar Institute and talk about the Wistar Institute is important for current intelligent design theory because it was one of the first times that mathematicians were asked to do sort of statistical analysis, probability analysis on the kinds of explanatory range or the explanatory power that natural selection has as a natural mechanism for being the driving engine of evolution.
And in fact, it's the atheists, according to them, who were led into error because they were trying to close the books desperately so as not to leave any gap large enough for a God to be smuggled into the canon of science. I am persuaded that the Richard Dawkins of the world, who have contributed, in my estimation, hugely to modern evolutionary theory, are so afraid of dealing with religious colleagues that they were eager to shut the books and not give many of these people their due. And what's more, the concept of intelligent design is a really interesting one.
Now he goes on to talk about the nature of intelligence, exogenous intelligence, basically a naturalistic view of intelligence. So he's not, to be clear, he's not endorsing intelligent design per se, as we discuss it in conservative contemporary Christian circles. Okay, so hopefully up to this point, we've seen Eric's facility with a number of different issues and ranges of things that touch on the natural sciences, their history, their sociology, and things like that. But he's also a man of faith, kind of. And to get at where my major disagreement with Weinstein is in this discussion that he has with Rabbi Wolpe. Now, it's worth listening to the entire podcast. I've listened to it several times. But here at the very end is a way for me to both criticize Weinstein's atheism and promote this kind of existential Thomism. So it's a twofer for me.
But I always liked the Robert Jastrow image, which you may know, that he said when physicists, climb that final mountain, they're going to find God looking at them from the other side. I don't believe that it's possible, and I'll tell you why I say that. I have a deep and abiding faith in the limitations of the human mind. By that, I don't mean that we can't do astonishing things, but when I ask people sometimes, this is how you can tell if you're religious. Is there a mystery at the heart of the world? Not a puzzle, but a mystery. Because a puzzle you can figure out, but a mystery is in principle unfigure-outable.
Yeah, so this is a great statement that the religious impulse has at its heart this notion that at the very heart of the universe, he says the world, at the heart of the universe, there is a mystery. Now, in my studies in philosophy of religion, we talk about God as being mysterious. And as we get to the end where we look at Eric's grounds for atheism. They're talking about whether or not physics could create a final theory that basically explains all things. And the rabbi's pushback is basically an anti-rationalistic one. He's anti-rational in saying that if you hold to a religious worldview, it's because you believe that ultimately, at the heart of all things, there's a mystery that's impenetrable to the human mind.
Really believe that there is a mystery at the heart of the universe, not a puzzle, so that we won't ever have the kind of final theory that you're talking about, because the world is created by something infinitely greater than anything we can imagine. I have no idea what God is. I have no idea. I said, think of it this way. When you were 2 years old, could you have imagined what a 14-year-old is? Not only could you not have imagined it, you couldn't have imagined what it is that you can't imagine. I assume that whatever is out there, that whatever is ultimate, is so far beyond anything that I or any human being can conceive of. I think our fate is to always search and be more and more and more comprehensive, but never to achieve the kind of finality that that is suggested by your question.
See, that's really weird to me. I'll give you two examples of why it doesn't work.
Okay.
For me.
Yes.
I'm not saying you're wrong. The first is the number of different phenomena that were encompassed by Maxwell's equation. I can really write Maxwell's equations in a modern context in one line. And all of that stuff about X-rays and UV and visible light and magnetism and electricity, it's all subsumed in this one damn equation.
Okay.
So there are these condensations where you realize that it's much simpler than you ever imagined. The amount of unification, the idea that every living thing is predicated on 20 amino acids and 4 nucleotides so far as we know, or that everything that you see out there is just up quarks, down quarks, electrons, and whatever we use to stick them together. It looks very varied, but the set is very small.
500 years ago, you were in the position of that 2-year-old. You couldn't imagine what you couldn't imagine that Maxwell's equations would answer. I have a great deal of faith in the unfathomable. I think that you're making the opposite mistake. Because we have figured out so much as compared to 1,000 years ago, we are therefore close to the end. And what I think is, with every discovery, you will discover vast realms of ignorance that you haven't yet even begun to tap, that will make the idea of a final theory a comprehensive
You're
theory.
mistaking what a final theory is. There's a question about going down towards the foundations. Mm-hmm. There's a question about going up towards the consequences. That if we go down towards the foundations, that tells us nothing about all the different ways we might arrange what we learn at the foundations to create emergence.
He's actually talking about the simplicity of a set of causes that can. So his example were the amino acids being this small set of amino acids being responsible for all the diversity of life. Basically, what he's saying is that there's an emergentism where from a very small set of physical forces, a plethora of diversity can emerge, and that's kind of where he's getting right here.
So what are you asking me about how I envision a final theory?
Well,
that it would be mathematical, that it would be
presumably
religious,
we've been trying to come up with a theory of everything.
Right.
And when you hear the words theory of everything, I mean, I always think that the physicists who traffic in that have never thought through the question of, assume that you actually, that the dog caught the car. Do you have any idea of what that would even look like? Because to say this is complete, does it have no, you say unmoved mover, like there's no boundary condition. I mean, to give you an idea of how crazy this is, let me give you my version of God, since you've given me some indication of yours.
Okay, go ahead.
I believe that God starts off being a boundary condition, being a design constraint, completely inanimate, non-sentient. And the reason that I don't like the thing about get to the highest peak and you reach the end and God is there is that it mistakes the magic that I think might happen. We don't realize that we are the artificial intelligence that arose in the system. And if Darwinian theory is true, right, this bubbled up emergently.
Right.
And that when we learn our own source code, is that what effectively creates a meaningful version of God? Because it started out inanimate and that we are that which will animate it because we are that which arose emergently within the system.
This is sort of a combination of, well, it's kind of like Thomas Nagel's panpsychism, and it's kind of like Hegel's absolute one, that reality is becoming more and more conscious of itself, and that humans are at the highest level of that because humans are the means by which reality is coming to know itself. It's waking up to its own consciousness. So this is not unique to Eric, but he comes at it in a idiosyncratic way because this is an area of philosophy that it seems like he's unfamiliar with.
It's so far beyond what I am capable of understanding about the shape of the theory. I can only take refuge in theological speculations. I don't have physics or mathematical speculation, and the theological speculation is to quote one of the great church fathers, Aquinas, that we're emptying the ocean with a teaspoon.
Wolpe is right in what he's affirming, namely that God's nature is unfathomable to the human mind. At the deepest levels of metaphysics, there are two metaphysical principles that are of different orders. There's the essential order and there's the existential order. The essential order is what things are, and the existential order is the power that makes things be, makes them be actual. And so Rabbi Wolpe seems to think along the essential order in that the essence of the divine essence is so big that no matter how much of it we come to know, there will always be more to know. We're emptying the ocean with a teaspoon. And that's certainly fine, but I don't think that's correct. When God reveals himself to Moses and names himself in Exodus, he says, "I am that I am has sent you." He gives himself this uniquely existential definition of what he is. The reason there is an impenetrable mystery about the divine essence is precisely because the existential order defies conceptualization itself. And if that's what God is, if God is pure existence, then that is why between these two orders, the order of essence and the order of existence, that is why the divine essence will always be an impenetrable mystery to the human intellect. So that's it. That's my commentary. That's my video love letter to Eric. This is why I love Eric Weinstein. He has all of these unique properties that you just don't find in people working at this level of academia that I just absolutely love. It's why I dedicated my book, Beyond Origin, to Eric, because Eric, among other things, he's an advocate for great science. He is open to people that are slightly adjacent to or outside the field of science entirely, potentially making a contribution to it. So for those reasons, I just love this guy.